Alright, here's another one. Being able to build and work with fiberglass and carbon fiber and other types of composites is a very cool skill to have. Now, I started messing with this stuff back in probably 2001. We were building those fiberglass stereo systems for our cars and trucks, and it was like the coolest thing at the time. I'd see it in magazines. I knew shops locally that could do it, but they rarely ever did because nobody had the money to really pay for it. So I built my center console and went on to build speaker boxes for friends in the military some years later. And then as I got into the civilian aircraft industry for a little bit, I was actually doing repairs on older aircraft. We were doing restorations, and I got to do a lot of parts where they needed to either be refiberglassed with a few new layers, or I actually had to build small parts from scratch, or basically make a mold of the old part that was all broken and cracked and make a new one out of fiberglass. You'll find that when you can do it, the sky is the limit. I mean, you can build compound curves and all kinds of, bodies for your go-kart or whatever, bodies for a real car, anything. And it's not that it's super difficult or rocket science, but it takes quite a while to get good at it. So I decided that for beginners out there that have no idea how to work with fiberglass and deal with the resin and all that, I made a short video, and hopefully this is going to help you guys out a little bit. Now, it starts out with two different components, basically a solid material and a liquid material. You're going to have a liquid resin that you mix up with a hardener. It's going to turn super hard like plastic, and then you're going to have your solid material, which is fiberglass mat or a fiberglass cloth, and there's lots of different ways and sizes that you can get it. The fiberglass cloth woven roving is probably one of my favorites to work with. And it's just basically like a square grid pattern. If you look at it really close, the little glass fibers are woven together just like a bunch of little squares. And you can get it in, small squares all the way up to really big, what they use for water slides at theme parks or water parks and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can order it. Now, chop mat isn't really one of my favorites, but it definitely has its place. I feel like when you're trying to make something kind of quick and maybe you just need it to work really easily, the chop mat is probably a good way to go. But what I don't like about it is that it just uses a lot of resin. With the woven cloth, you don't really need a lot of resin at all, and when you're kind of adding layers to a pre-existing form, it's really, really nice that you can use a little squeegee and you can just about get all the excess resin out of that woven cloth, whereas with chop mat, it just really soaks up a lot. And then I feel like if you build a component solely out of chop mat, it's a lot more likely to crack than if you use a good woven cloth and you get all the extra resin out. It can be a lot more flexible, which is really cool. Now, like I said, it does have its advantages, and it feels like sometimes you can push the chop mat into crevices a little bit easier, but then again, the woven cloth does that well too. Sometimes you just got to make a cut slot in it and it'll lay all kinds of different ways. It's amazing. Also, before I get too carried away, your solid material doesn't always have to be glass. Sometimes, of course, some of you love the carbon fiber look, and that's used a lot on aircraft, especially military fighter jets. You can also have Kevlar fiber that's woven. There's even hybrids of it where you've got carbon and Kevlar mixed up, or even glass and carbon or whatever. So there's all kinds of different ways you can get your material. So let's dive into this video. I'm going to show you guys how I do a really small repair. And if you're following the Vaydor build videos where I'm building my own Vaydor supercar or whatever you want to call it, I'm actually doing this repair on the windshield frame because the kit came with a bit of a crack. Something must have hit it either during transport or maybe whenever they were loading it. And I decided to use this repair in this video. So let's get into it. Now in this video, we're not really doing a repair where there's a big section missing. That's going to be a completely different approach. What I basically want is to show you guys how to fix something really small, like a crack or a tear, something kind of like this. And the first thing that you've got to do is get rid of any paint and primer or gel coat that's on that fiberglass. And you got to remember, stripping fiberglass is not at all like metal. You got to be careful, because if you're sanding with 36 or 40 grit and it's on a little die grinder, you can grind right through the fiberglass and just cause yourself more work. So you don't want to do that. You always want to see that when you get down to the fiberglass in a small spot, that's where you kind of got to slow down and say, okay, you've made it through 3 or 4 layers of paint and primer. Now you get down to that final layer, and it's time to maybe do it by hand or a DA instead of something that just spins. So you want to strip down to that fiberglass pretty bare and make sure that it's pretty consistent. You don't want to have any gouges in it and things like that. The nicer that you do this, the easier it's going to be for your repair to come out clean. The main thing to know when it comes to the sanding phase is that the resin sticks really well to some good deep scratches. So you're going to want to use some 36 grit or 40 grit sandpaper that's fresh, and you can even use it with your hand or do little circles. Anything like that that's going to rough up that surface really good is going to help that resin stick. Also, when you're stripping, you typically want to go out a little ways. So if you have a crack that you're going to repair, you need to decide how big of fiberglass pieces that you're going to use, and you need to sand down to the fiberglass in that large of an area. So let's just say that your crack is, barely 1/8 of an inch wide, maybe even 1/16 of an inch wide. You probably want to leave 1 inch or 2 on each side so you've got some room for your fiberglass pieces to bond. In some cases, you might want to go 1 foot. It really just depends on the size of the damage, and it's all going to come down to how much surface area that you want that repair to have to make sure that it holds on really well. Now once you've got paint and primers and coatings off, really the next thing you need to do is remove any little damaged pieces. So any loose fiberglass that's left in there, any fibers, any broken pieces that are just kind of hanging on, you want to get rid of all that. And typically with your die grinder, or you can use a Dremel or rotary type tool, and there's a really nice bit. It's just basically cylindrical, and it's meant for etching out. You can actually carve with the tip of it, or you can carve with the sides of it whenever it spins. So that bit works really, really well for small cracks in the fiberglass. And you just basically want to clean all that out.
Alright, so this is showing you the windshield area of the Vaydor where we're doing the crack repair. So basically what happened, somewhere in transport, this area of the windshield frame got a crack in it. And because of the way that something must have hit it from up under here, or got caught, because this side was staying high. And because of the broken fiberglass, it wouldn't let it go back. It was just kind of on a bind. So what you gotta do to prep it, I ground out as much of the old delaminated fiberglass as I could. And you can see when it's kind of light colored there, that means that layers of the fiberglass have separated. Now I could get the rest of that out, but it may not be necessary. Also, try not to make holes. You want to get it as thin as you can. You want this to gradually kind of slope down because you're going to get good surface area that way. So make it as thin as you can without doing holes. I accidentally did, so a little bit of resin might leak through there. I'll probably put some tape under it just to keep it from going through. Then you want to scuff it down really good with some 36 grit, and that's how you prep the repair. And basically we're going to lay some woven fiberglass cloth. We're going to cut some pieces. Probably the first piece will just be a nice skinny one so it lays down in there, and then gradually we're going to make them bigger and bigger. I'll probably try to do, how thick is this glass? Probably somewhere, that has chop mat in it, so there would be less layers. It just holds a lot of resin. When I'm doing a repair with the woven cloth, it's very thin, so this could easily take 5 to 7 or 8 layers. And that's like the small 3-ounce glass, I think. Bigger woven stuff, of course, would be different, but I'm going to use the small stuff so I can gradually make it thicker and thicker from the middle. And then by the time we get out here, we'll have one piece that covers pretty much all this area, and it'll be the last one to cover over the other layers. As for the tools to get it to this point, I'm using typically the little Dremel type rotary tool with one of these little carving bits in it, or I don't know what you'd really call that. It'll notch stuff out really, really skinny. And I'll start in the middle to get out all the loose pieces of glass and work my way out. when you get big enough, then you can start using your cutoff wheel. Just be really careful. I mean, you can lightly shave with that thing really nice, or of course the right angle grinder with a sanding pad on it. That's going to be a good one. And you probably need the smaller one for a repair like this. With some finesse, you can kind of get around real gently the way you have to, and of course run it slow. But that's pretty much what I'm using to clean out an old fiberglass crack that I'm getting ready to repair.
Now, those of you who have been around the channel for a while, you know that I love the West System epoxy resin. I've used it on aircraft and all kinds of projects in the past, and it's been phenomenal. I've never had any issues with delamination. It always hardens and cures really well, and I just feel like it's been a great multi-purpose resin, and I just always keep it around. It's good stuff. One thing about a lot of these companies with epoxies, you can choose whether you want a slow or a fast hardener. I happen to have the fast hardener because I feel like it works for most of the stuff I do, especially with the West resin that I use. I feel like with the fast hardener, it's not near as fast as polyester. I mean, with a polyester, you activate that stuff and you barely get time to work with it sometimes. But with this fast hardener, you can still have at least a good hour or so, depending on the temperature. I mean, unless you mix it really hot, there's a little bit of an adjustment. There's a lot of variables in it, but if you mix everything just right, the fast hardener from West System still gives you enough work time where it's not so crazy. I mean, unless it's a really hot day, if you're working in a lot of really hot days, you probably want to order the slow resin. But it's a pretty good versatile hardener, and I'm totally fine with the 205. So when you order the West System resin, usually you can get the hardener and the resin with a pump kit. And what's really cool about it is that it's calibrated. So 1 pump of resin will be the correct mix with 1 pump of the hardener. And once you get that resin mixed, you can see here we're starting to lay the fiberglass layers on, one at a time. I just use a really small paintbrush, and I'll brush a thin layer of resin on the surface first. And then as I'm working the layers on, you want to use a really thin cut squeegee, like maybe a Bondo spreader that you've cut down to the size of the repair, maybe somewhere around a 1/2 inch to 1 inch wide. And that's going to help you keep that resin moving around until you get it to that thickness and that smoothness that you want it.
Okay, so this layout is probably about the best I could do with this little crack. Now, what you want to look at is you see how there's no puddling of the resin. You don't have a whole bunch of extra. It's like, I'm literally using drops of resin at a time because it soaks so well into this type of glass. One thing too with edges, you want to leave a little bit hanging off. Make sure you get full saturation all the way to the edge. And I let it fold down that way just a little bit so I know it's not coming up. Okay, that way I know that the glass is all the way on the edge. It's not going to have a separation there. But yeah, the way that you can see the glare and the light hitting the weave, that's, maybe it looks like a little bit of a puddle up there, but I don't even think it's nothing really. So that's probably about the best I could do with this small repair. It's gonna sand real easy. Also, I'm okay with leaving the edges a little dry where I have to sand, because I don't wanna, if I'm grinding really hard right here against that gel coat, I'm just lowering this area. So I'd rather sand in here, and then once I get that pretty flat, it just kind of blends out, what's kind of dry. Of course, I got a little, wet there, but it's fine. That new resin is not really gonna stick to that gel coat. Unless you have it sanded good, which I do, but it's just one of those things. I try to only work where I've stripped the fiberglass bare. So there we go. We're gonna let this dry up till tomorrow, and then pull the tape off from the back and clean it up.
So that'll pretty much take us to the end of this repair. Once it's fully cured, you can go back and trim the edge down, you can sand it a little bit on top, a lot of times you can, sand it just enough to where it'll hold the Bondo or whatever body filler that you're going to use, because you're pretty much always going to want to come back and put a skim coat of filler over it, and of course the edges are going to need to blend a little if it ends up a little low compared to your repair. But that's pretty much it. I mean, there's not a whole lot to it. One of the biggest things when it comes to fiberglass and beginners is that they're very sloppy, and it's hard not to be sloppy because there's just a lot of new things. You're trying to be quick, you're trying to make sure your resin's not going to cure up on you, which you don't really have that problem with the epoxy. And there's just a lot of new factors. I mean, it's very easy to make a huge mess when you do any kind of fiberglass work. Always wear a respirator, that's definitely important. Even when you're cutting the stuff, you'll realize in the right light that those little glass fibers, they actually fly into the air just from the scissors cutting. So be safe about it. It's not good stuff to be breathing in. Also, with the pump system, I wanted to mention that if you make the correct measurements on your pump stems, you could make a marking for halfway, because there's lots of times, especially with a small repair like this, I don't use much resin at all, and I've found that I can do a half pump, and that way I'm not wasting so much resin. And of course, a lot of times it's better too if you have multiple things that you're repairing, so you're going to mix your resin, and most likely you won't have as much leftover, or you won't be making these one-time repairs and making a full pump and then having half of it left over. So especially with the price of the West system, I mean, it's great for the money you pay for it, but I also don't want to waste it. And I want to say I typically pick up these gallon kits with the hardener for somewhere around $175. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something from this. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. There's lots of different composite and fiberglass types of repairs out there. This is just one of them. So I hope it helped you out, and I want to see you guys here at the next one. Thanks for all the support out there, and cheers.